Good morning. We are live on YouTube on the Falcons Podcast, but let's bring in our Facebook groups, Atlanta Falcons on SI and Scott Kennedy Sports. So we get everybody in. It's football week, training camp week in Georgia and across the NFL, and we are spinning and good. Welcome in, everybody. This is the Falcons Podcast. It is football week in Georgia as the Atlanta Falcons report to training camp this week at Flowery Branch. We want to get into a bunch of things today. There's updated power rankings going into training camp. There's over-unders on win totals, et cetera, et cetera. But first, Nick, bright and early, after an airport run about 4 hours ago, is here with us today. Nick, how you doing, my friend?
Pretty tired. I'll have to be back at the airport in 22 hours because I'll be heading off to Vegas for climbing Mount Whitney. But yeah, doing well here. Little tired, going on about 3 hours of sleep right now, 3.5 hours of sleep. And the little guy the day before that, he'd been sleeping really well through the night, but they decided, grandparents are supposed to be here today, so I'm going to be fussy. Got 36 hours, got here 36 hours later. So I don't know, that whole whatever the heck system crash there was, definitely chaos at the airports. So glad my parents made it, but long, frustrating journey.
Yeah, the Microsoft hack or whatever it was. Not good. Didn't affect me, thankfully, because I wasn't doing anything, but just, working. So it didn't really affect our websites, which was good. Pods, et cetera, all good. But yeah, it raised havoc between that and the weather the last week. Flying's been a little tough for folks. So I want to say good morning to Michael Ronquillo. He's in here nice and early. He says, good morning, Scott and Nick on the Falcons Podcast. The sunrise. Welcome in, Michael. I know Michael's excited for this week, getting ready for camp. So one of the things we wanted to talk about today, and there's plenty we want to get into, and we'll take your questions as well as they start to come in. The power rankings. Power rankings have come in. Now there's no major shifts. Salute to that you're going to see through the offseason from what you saw from post-free agency. There's power rankings post-draft. There's power rankings pre-training camp. There's power rankings. And then the next one will be preseason, after preseason power rankings. Or there might even be one before the first preseason games. But post-preseason, right into the schedule, the regular season schedule, the only one that really matters is the win totals. We want to talk about that too. Bleacher Report did both. They said, what should you do on the over and under win totals? Falcons 9.5. And then they came out with a new power rankings. Nick, I don't know if you've looked at them early, but where do you think the Falcons came in on power rankings? And if you already know, do you think it seems about right?
I have not looked yet. So again, 3.5 hours of sleep. But saw it 10 minutes ago. Okay, that sounds like a good plan, Scott. But I would probably put them at about. Okay, I would put them probably in about 9 or 10. I'm guessing Bleacher Report probably has them about 12 to 14.
They were 16.
Okay.
Yeah, they came in at 16. And again, I think when you start looking at that type of stuff, I look at it as, okay, you like to say, and I agree. I always said I like a line graph. Let's give everything points, and then you can see, okay, there's a drop from here from 11 to 12. You see there's a big gap, or, and it's relatively flat between 9 and 15. So, those are all in the same argument. I look at 16. I'm like, okay, well, who's ahead of them then? And you're like, okay, 16 at 15 comes Cleveland Browns. Okay, they're solid. The New York Jets, I might question just a little bit, but there's a lot of Aaron Rodgers love coming in there. Should they be the team they were? Coming in at 13 is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Again, tiers here. 12 Dallas Cowboys. I think they're up for a regression after 3 straight 12-win seasons. Los Angeles Rams at 11. Miami Dolphins at 10. And I think one of the really high ones on here is the Green Bay Packers at 9. So I look at all of those teams, and then the Eagles, I think, come in at 8. Which Eagles do we get? Do we get the team that looked like the first 10 weeks of the season looked like the best team in football? Or do we get the team that looked like they were tanking for a new quarterback or whoever to the end of the season? But I think anywhere, and then Tampa Bay 17. And they won the South last year and played pretty good football to finish the season last year. I think anywhere in that 9 to 17, I know that's a big range, but there's that middle tier where you roll up your dice and say Yahtzee. It could be any one of those teams, and any one of those orders I'm okay with. But let's get into why they might go 16, Nick. Why would they be lower than you might think, and why do you think they should be higher?
Well, first-year head coach in a new system. Everything is pretty much new on both sides of the ball in that regard. Kirk Cousins coming off that serious injury. Again, new system for him as well. And there's question about the depth for me on the defensive secondary and difference makers on the defensive front. So all that together makes a team that I guess is probably hovering around middle of the pack. I still think it's a little low. The team that I would sell out of all those teams listed above them for sure would be the Steelers. Maybe that's me being a little bit jaded by what I saw from Russell Wilson, but that was a team that I mean, Tomlin's still there, but I don't know. The NFC or AFC North is going to be pretty tough. But overall, that seems about right. Jets have probably a really good defense. I wouldn't take the Browns over the Falcons. I think what we saw from Deshaun Watson last year was too poor to bet on them. I'd take Kirk Cousins for sure on that grouping going into this season. But all in all, makes sense.
We got some folks rolling in now as some of the notifications are going out. Make sure you hit that like button and share. That helps us find more of our lost wayward souls, Falcons fans. It's a big help. So I want to say hello to some folks that have rolled in, like SFC J Williams. Good to see you. Love that picture. Looks like you're having a good time. Leon, good morning. Glad you made it here today. Edward Brown says, good morning. Preseason is just around the corner. When's the first preseason game? 2 weeks? I mean, it really is right around the corner. They don't mess around. They come back. They play. Well, some of them play. Not everybody plays preseason. Alan, good to see you. Says, I made it live. Good to see. SFC, Army Day for me. Having a great Army Day. Good. Thank you for everything that you do. Leon says, let me know when you got the hot chocolate in. Michael Lewitsky sent us some hot chocolate and a care package. I dug into those moon pies. What are they? The guava and the coconut lemon or banana. I'm not even sure what they are. They're yellow. I thought they were banana too, but I wasn't positive. I didn't care. I scarfed down 4 of them last night while I was watching. So thank you, Michael. Chris Walker's in. He says, good morning, Scott and Nick and everyone watching. That's all of y'all. Good to see you. Todd has a question here. Guys, are we better on defense this year than last? This is, to me, an excellent question. This is one of the reasons why I think the Atlanta Falcons could be rated in the teens and not higher, because I think personnel-wise, they have a top 10 defense. Their quarterback was playing at a top 5 level last year. Expect him to come back from injury. If I can expect Aaron Rodgers to come back from injury, by God, I can expect Kirk Cousins to come back from injury, right? We talked about the offensive line, the weapons on defense. We went into the importance of the blocking tight ends, Charlie Warner last week. But look on the defense. They really didn't add to the defense. I think they're expecting, as far as starters go, yes, we can get into the depth in the draft. They're expecting organic improvements through this season, Nick. Does it happen? And I'm going to run through where that's supposed to happen. Grady Jarrett comes back. Arnold Ebiketie takes a step to the next level as a third-year guy. Troy Anderson comes back at linebacker. You've got 2 young guys who finished the season pretty strong at safety in DeMarco Helms and Clark Phillips at corner. 1, 2, 3, 4. Is that 5 players I just mentioned? That's 5 players that are either coming back from injury or are rookies that you're hoping to take the next step along the lines. Is this defense, from a personnel-wise, can they be better than they were last year despite losing Calais Campbell and Bud Dupree?
They can be better personnel-wise. You do have questions. I mean, Lake had hit or miss as a defensive coordinator. He definitely flamed out hard a couple blocks from me here down at a little south of me here at the University of Washington. And Nielsen was really good last season. I mean, there's a reason he was gobbled up immediately on the market with the Jags, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. So personnel-wise, they could be better. I mean, that's one of the benefits of having so many top 100 picks that you have invested on that side of the ball. Even though it's not been first-round picks, you've invested top 100 picks, and those guys should be ascending, back half of their rookie contract. So on paper, that's true, but it's always the believe it when you see it, right? You talk about Clark Phillips, second year. Well, doesn't mean he's going to be better this year. He could be worse this year.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as automatic assumed linear growth with these players. It could be a new system, could have a niggle and a type of injury that kind of slows them down as well, especially at the cornerback spot. But on paper, in theory, yes, that's true.
Todd, and I think they can be better despite the lack of investment. Let's just call it what it is, lack of investment in the offseason on the defensive side of the ball. I think they can be better because they weren't great last year. Now, there were some great performances, and you look at it and say, okay, they were 11th in total defense last year. They were also 18th in scoring. And it felt like if the Falcons offense happened to be clicking and the defense needed to step up, they didn't. It's like, okay, teams kind of played to win. They played to win. And if the offense was doing well, the defense was giving up points and late drives. And teams were like, okay, we're going to have to push the gas pedal a little more, take a few more risks and put up some more points. And then they could do that. So the defense, it wasn't great last year by any stretch of the imagination. It was improved, doubled the amount of sacks, and still finished bottom third. That's how poor the defense was. But yes, I think the defense can be better, but I don't think it's the strength of this team. I think you're looking for average defense with some transcendent players, Jesse Bates, making plays, winning games. And then I really think this team right now is built on offense. The investment has been made on offense. This offense, Arthur Smith is no longer the coach of this team because the offense floundered so badly last year, despite the huge investment. Now there's an even bigger investment in the offense, doubled down on quarterback. The offense, this is an offensive team. Defense, keep it close, guys. Get the ball back to the offense. That's where this team's going to be.
The one question here, or the one, X factor, is Raheem Morris's impact on the defense. Obviously Arthur Smith, the offensive guy, hands all over the scheme and the play calls and the design. Do you lose a little bit going with the first-time offensive coordinator in Atlanta? That's remains to be seen. First-time play caller, obviously Sean McVay is the wizard out there in Los Angeles. So we will see, of course. But you are right. I mean, on personnel-wise, there's not an excuse. I mean, you double dipped at quarterback with a super premium investment. You spent a top 8 pick at running back the year before. Your offensive line is very, very highly invested in overall. So this should be an offensive-led team with a bunch of, I think, good baseline and bones in the defense. How many transcendent players do you have on defense? Like how many, future multi-time All-Pro, potential Hall of Fame guys? I mean, Bates is incredible last season. He's definitely on that All-Pro track. I wouldn't say the Hall of Fame just yet.
But safeties. It's tough for safeties anyway.
It is. It is tough for safety. You got to be Ed Reed, Troy Polamalu out there to reach that level. But overall, you should be a pretty good defense this season. And as you mentioned, average. Do you have any, closers on the defensive line? Because I mean, watching Von Miller for a number of years, it's pretty obvious when you have somebody who's like, okay, it's third down, or it's fourth quarter, they have to score here. When you have that guy to close games out, it's different. And I don't know if you have that. I think Grady Jarrett's a hell of a player. It's pretty hard to be a true closer on the interior defensive line.
I can double those guys. It's nice having a couple of them. You need David Onyemata and Grady Jarrett to play healthy. Both of them healthy. They're really good together, but they need Ebiketie to step up. Maybe Braylon Trice surprises. Lorenzo Carter, I think we know who he is at this point.
Harrison.
But or isn't.
Yeah, but we also have Harrison. He's somebody we haven't mentioned yet who, he had some pretty strong games there down the stretch last year. Scott, I don't expect him to be a superstar, but out of your, first and second line, you love to have piece, young, talented, length player like that. So he's another one. If we're mentioning Ebiketie, Dorless as well, you got to throw in Harrison.
Yeah, another one of those guys that we talk about taking a step up. You lose Campbell, but Zach Harrison plays more snaps. So you've invested heavily into the offensive side of the ball. You're expecting organic growth for your team and health for your team to be better on defense. This is a great question. And Keith, we hit on this one just a little bit, As far as let's talk coaching. And good morning. Appreciate the stars. Thank you for breaking the ice for us. He says, with the new coaching staff, where do we see the biggest improvements and where could there be a step back? I think by default, the offense gets better, just flat out. The entire offense is better this year, period. Doesn't matter if it's Michael Penix at quarterback. Doesn't matter if it's Kirk Cousins at quarterback. It would be tough for them to be as poor on offense as they were last year, period. So let's look at the other side of the ball. We talked about Ryan Nielsen. Ryan Nielsen did a good job with what he had. Again, doubling the number of sacks despite not having a sack artist. You get 42 sacks when your highest sack guys were 6.5 each. Ryan Nielsen did a good job with a team that they made some investments again, but they haven't built the defense quite yet. They made a big investment in building the defense for the future this last draft.
Yeah. And to your point, it's kind of water boy football, in the Bourbon Bowl, when they're kneeing rather than giving it to the defense. Just no respect for the offense last season with the Falcons. And you made a good point. Teams seem to be playing to the offense, and if they needed to put the pedal to the metal a little bit to score some points, they could do that. So some of that is, just the nature of game management of NFL teams. It's not like college where they're just trying to, style points and kill you. It's honestly a little bit like Iowa, where it's like, look how good that Iowa defense is. Well, teams aren't even caring about scoring points because they know once they get to double digits, it's over. So that's Iowa still beats them sometimes. Crazy, but good special teams matter, Scott. But I agree.
Just says, I am Cornholio. Are you threatening me? Yeah, I did a pretty good Cornholio. I was a pretty good Beavis in college.
I know
about 40 pounds ago. I was a pretty good Beavis. Bucks Rays Bolts. Good morning, Jamal D. Good morning. How you doing? Dave Glassman is here. I feel like I missed a couple people. Nick Thatch, good to see you. Roy, good to see you as well. Let me see here. I had a question coming in from Bucks Rays Bolts. And then Maurice, I see you as well. He says, how's the Falcons offensive line this year? I think the Falcons offensive line is really, really good. We talked about the investment on offense. I think the lowest investment player on the starting 11, just off the top of my head, was center Drew Dahlman. Was a 4th-round pick. After that, Drake London, 1st-round pick. Let's go across the front. Kyle Pitts, 1st-round pick. Jake Matthews, 1st-round pick. Matthew Bergeron at left guard, 2nd-round pick. Center Dahlman, 4th-round pick. Right guard Chris Lindstrom, 1st-round pick. Right tackle Caleb McGarry, 1st-round pick. Darnell Mooney, high-price free agent. I think he was a 2nd-round pick, high-price free agent. And then there's one more slot guy, one more receiver you can throw in there, I believe, unless I'm missing somebody. And then Bijan Robinson, 1st-round pick. There's a lot of investment put into this defense. Charlie Warner, I guess, might be your tight end in that, but that's a lot of investment in this offense, including the offensive line, where we've talked about the Falcons have built an offense. They've kind of bought a defense in order to try and get in there. It's almost all draft picks, aside from the quarterback, on offense this year.
We are waiting to see if Bergeron can take another step forward. Jake Matthews is a year older. And one thing also about the offensive line, we kind of talked about it last week, Scott, about despite having the heavy personnel, not really good blocking grades, but just from a formation perspective, you can protect your tackles a lot from heavier 12 personnel, just the angles and double teaming chip blocks. Is that going to carry over with this new regime and new scheme? I mean, we know that I don't know if you guys know, but Sean McVay, very, very clever in what he does. He makes a lot of things look the same out of the same personnel package. But I think it's been some of the heaviest 3 wide receiver offensive sets of any team in the NFL. And that puts a little bit more on the offensive line and the quarterback to maneuver the pocket, get rid of the football. But I am worried about specifically Caleb McGarry. Obviously, he had the high grades a couple years ago. But again, that was very heavy personnel, a lot of tight ends, a lot of help, a lot of condensed formations. I don't think that's going to be the case going into this season. So he's going to be a little bit more vulnerable, a little bit more exposed. And we talk about, that first line, but offensive line, typically you're going to see 7, 8 guys see a good amount of reps. And this is an issue across the league. Teams don't have good depth. The ones that do hoard it, but your second string tackles, Tyler Vrabel, Storm Norton, I mean, if somebody goes down or McGarry's struggling, you don't have many places to go. And again, this isn't a Falcons issue. This is an NFL issue at the tackle position. But it's always worth mentioning, I feel like, when you look at teams, because you have some teams who do have the depth, and you don't want to see it, but a lot of times you are going to see it over the course of a now 17-game season.
Yeah, Storm played pretty good when he came in from McGarry last year, but you need McGarry to be the guy. Could this team regress in pass protection? One, yes, they could, but your quarterback play and should be so much better pre-snap and post-snap. Kirk's a pocket passer. He knows where to go with the ball. He knows when to get rid of the ball, and it's easier to block for a guy if I know where he's going to be. You know, I just need to set my pocket. I don't have to worry about him bailing out and coming out behind me. It's like, wait a minute, I pushed my guy wide, and the quarterback ran right into him. You know, we've seen that as well. Turnovers, you're hoping should improve dramatically. It wasn't just the amount of turnovers last year for the Atlanta Falcons, but by God, it seemed like they got their money's worth, either inside your own 10 or inside the other team's 10. The turnovers were just killers. It wasn't 3rd and 18 and I got picked off at the 20. You know, those are punts. So what?
Yeah.
They were killer turnovers, Nick. That should improve also.
In theory, I mean, we did talk about a little bit. Kirk Cousins and his fumbles are worth monitoring here in a way that you should be better in the pocket and the manipulation. And he did a really good job the last few years of being a pocket mover and protecting his offensive line in that way and getting rid of the football. But he does have a case of getting the ball knocked out of his hands in the pocket. So we'll want to keep an eye on that. And you're 100% right. It's not all turnovers are the same. That's one reason I like EPA so much, because it factors in where on the field you are, the down, the distance, et cetera, et cetera. It's all about based on the situation as well. So I would imagine not only the raw numbers of turnovers, but Falcons probably had some of the largest negative EPA impact from turnovers last season, just because the situation where on the field, time of the game that these were occurring.
Going into the end zone and having the ball swatted out of your hands. You know, I picture one of the last passes I feel like Desmond Ridder threw was 3 people in the left-hand corner going down and driving at home. I don't remember who the opponent was. And they're just killers. And then when that starts happening, it's not like a one-off. Your team just goes so flat. You're like, oh, here we go again. Let's get on this one from Maurice real quick. Nick, it's not easy to scheme anybody with bad players, but he says, do you think it's easier to scheme offense or defense with bad players? Basically, all things being equal, which is easier to scheme and which one do you need the players for? I know what you're going to say.
Offense is easier to scheme, but you have to have a level of competency at quarterback and honestly offensive line. Otherwise it'll go flat. But defense, I mean, it's more of a reactionary position. So if you have guys who just can't hang, can't tackle, can't keep up, it's harder to scheme. So I would go offense easier for the scheming.
Yeah, definitely the offense. The offense is coordinated. The defense is built with freak athletes. So, obviously there's coaching involved in all of it and doing the right things at the right time. That is the simplified version. The offensive coordinator is more important than the defensive coordinator. The defensive personnel is more important than the offensive personnel, despite the paychecks, despite the paychecks, and the quarterbacks in there too.
Yeah, and that's one reason that you tend to see in college football, if you're a freak athlete, height, weight, speed guy, you're probably being moved to the defensive line. And also we love the underwear Olympics, the royal love the underwear Olympics. Doesn't tend to translate to every position. I mean, it is good to have. You'd rather have a better athlete than a worse athlete. But the positions where it really transfers is specifically the defensive line. The highest correlation between freak athletes leading to success in the NFL. And that takes less coordination. That's just guys reactionary and winning their one-on-one matchups. There is obviously scheming. I don't want to completely say that, they're out there freelancing it, before the snap, I got this guy, you got this guy. No, that's not happening. Teams are getting clever with what they're doing, disguising coverages, trying to manipulate pass protection rules to isolate and free up rushers. But I think defense is much more of a do you have the horses argument, where offense, as long as you have competency at the quarterback position and the offensive line, you can scheme it up.
For sure. Again, you need the players. It's an athlete's game on defense, and we if you've watched me long enough, and actually I mentioned him yesterday on Twitter with the safety trending. Taylor Mays is one of the most physically gifted football players ever to step on a college football field. He's a 6'4", 220-pound 4.3 safety for USC. He was not a very good football player, overall speaking, at safety. I think in 3 or 4 years at USC and then 7 years in the NFL, he ended up catching on. He had 1 interception in about 10 years of playing college football. Interception. But he was so fast, if he finally diagnosed to play, he'd get there. I said, what do you do with a guy like this? Make him a designated pass rusher. Just forget anything else that you have to do and just say, 3rd and 8, Taylor, go get the quarterback. That's it. Said that about Boss Bailey. Boss Bailey was a better athlete than Champ. He's similar in all of his measurables, and he was 30 pounds heavier. But he did not have anywhere near the instincts of Champ Bailey. Champ Bailey is one of the best football players who also happens to be a freak athlete to ever step on a football field. Boss was a better athlete. As crazy as that sounds. And DSGB Hall, good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Bucks has a question. We're going to get out of here before too long. We're probably going to keep it at about 30 minutes as we get close to training camp here. It says, which coaching staff is on the hot seat this year, Scott, in the NFC South? You figure that the Panthers and Falcons get a pass. I think Bowles is definitely needs a good season, and then Dennis Allen in New Orleans needs a good season for sure. Wouldn't surprise me. Wouldn't have surprised me if they had made changes last year. We had talked about, does the NFC South have a clean sweep, and do they have 4 new coaches? 2 hung on, so they're definitely on the hot seat this year.
I would also throw out Doug Marrone. He's on the hot seat.
He just said just NFC South, but around the
okay. Yep.
Around, I think Chicago.
Chicago.
Chicago's on a 1 year there.
Dayball
with the New York Giants. How about McDermott in Buffalo?
Yeah.
As a sleeper candidate.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Sirianni in Philly as a sleeper candidate after finishing the way they did last year.
Yep. And the investment they've had, for sure. So we need to do the win total.
What's his name in Dallas?
McCarthy.
McCarthy's got to be on the hot seat too.
Yep. We got our guy, Rusty Moore. Says, fellas, haven't been following much Falcon content. Recently got into betting on UFC and have been heavy into that. But I'm really itching for football season near. May to July is bad for football content. Well, not bad because we're here hanging out, having a good time. But we've been busy here or there. I'm going to be gone Wednesday. But appreciate you, Rusty, coming in and supporting the show. And hope you have had a good summer.
Yes. Thank you for the support. Getting us cranked up over here on YouTube, Rusty, with a super chat. I certainly respect UFC. I just never have gotten into it. I think maybe part of it was the pay-per-views. I'm not paying for it, but I just haven't really been able to add new things. I was a huge boxing fan growing up into the 90s, and I think I finally got turned away from boxing. Evander Holyfield was basically my favorite athlete, any sport, period. I watched Lennox Lewis beat him from pillar to post one night. And they called it a draw. I'm like, this sport is too dirty for me. I'm like, I love Evander, and Lennox just absolutely annihilated him, and they called it a draw. UFC, love it. I think it's awesome, but I don't get to watch it. I'm glad you found an outlet, though. Broncos for Breakfast will be coming on at 9:30 Eastern. And there was one more question here I wanted to get from D-Will before we get out of here. D-Will, good to see you. He says, what's your best guess on the defensive setup? Who will be highlighted? There's the strength of this team really is in the defensive line, is in the front. They go 7 deep with David Onyemata, with Grady Jarrett, Zach Harrison, Taquan Graham. They drafted a bunch of guys to go behind them, including trading up for Ruka Rohoro. The defensive line is a strength. Edge rusher is not a strength. Arnold Ebiketie, you're hoping makes a big step, but the highest sack guy you've got at edge is 6, which was Ebiketie. You're hoping he makes a step up. Lorenzo Carter's a squad player. That's the term you use in soccer. He's a good squad player. He's a good guy to have, but he's not a difference maker. Rookies after that, or busted draft picks like D'Angelo Malone. I think the wild card here is Caden Ellis and Troy Anderson. I think that's your wild card play for the defensive side of the ball. You got Landman, who's steady Eddie, and now I've got 2 really good athletic guys in Caden Ellis, who I brought in to rush the passer, and Troy Anderson, who's an athletic freak at inside linebacker, who I can use those and move those guys around as my wild cards. That's kind of what I'm expecting.
As far as who will be highlighted, I think that after having a great season last year, I'm expecting him to have another good year in Jesse Bates. I think he will be highlighted. I do have questions about the back 7 compared to the defensive line, just from the talent. I mean, the investments not as high outside of Ed Terrell and Bates. Not a lot of premium investments or guys who have hit there yet. A lot of questions still. But as you mentioned earlier, an offense that should be a little bit more competent, a little bit more fearsome, and a team that's a little bit more defensive line depth oriented. That to me means hopefully playing with a lead, being able to, boa constrict towards the end, get a little bit of pressure, and teams being a little bit more aggressive / reckless with the football. Who does that highlight? Ball hawks, guys taking the ball away. We talk about maybe this team lacking closers on the defensive line, but you can have closers in the secondary as well. And I think Bates can be that with the formula and could be highlighted as well. Let's
finish on this. I think we hit on it a little bit, but we didn't get into it, especially since it's in the title. Bleacher Report put out they regurgitated the over/under win total for the Atlanta Falcons this year is 9.5. That wasn't news. What they did, and they said, do you want to take the over and the under on all 32 teams? I'm going to drop that in the chat here while we're talking about them. And they said the Falcons, because of the rough start that they could have with new coaches, new quarterback coming back from an injury, and their hardest games are in their first 5 games, that they could get off to a rough start. So take the under. Rusty says, I went through the schedule, 11-5 is the floor, anything less and fire everyone. The under on 9.5 would be 9-8. I'd be disappointed with 9-8, Nick. 9-8 would be a 2-game improvement. I don't think that's enough. I think I would be disappointed with 9-8 with this team, with this schedule.
Something would have had to have gone wrong to be 9-8. The injury, of course, happens, but you kind of, again, you double dipped at the quarterback. A lot of times it's like, well, anything can happen if the quarterback gets hurt, but with the investment around, I guess that's still true because, Penix, we just don't know yet if Kirk does go down, but
still can't be any worse than it was last year. That's the whole point.
Yeah, but you can regress in other areas to still have the formula come out. I mean, again, Scott, we've covered the Broncos enough to know that, it can't be worse. Well, we'll see. Even if they do improve in some areas, it's the leaky boat syndrome, right? Some other leak springs. But I think maybe I'm just optimistic. Typically not the case for my football analysis, but I think I probably do take the over. And that has a lot to do with just the state of the NFC South. I don't really respect any of the other teams in the NFC South, and just the NFC in general too. It's not a tough schedule. Falcons should have a really high floor. I think the 9.5 is a really good line. If I was, going through every single team's over and unders, I'd probably be like, maybe I'm not touching that one. I'll find another area where I'm more confident because I think that's a good line, especially with how many new pieces you have. It just adds more variables and more variance. But I guess if I had to, I would take the over.
Yeah, I'd probably take the over too, which I know Lucy and Charlie Brown with the football and the Atlanta Falcons. What are you thinking, Scott? But 9.5, I think, is a good line also. 10, and you're feeling better about this team. 9-8, 7-10 got a third-year guy fired last year. 9-8 is improvement. It's not good enough. Not for $100 million into the biggest problem you had on the team was quarterback, and you solved it.
Better,
theoretically, you have solved it. So if they don't win 10 games, it's a disappointment. You're disappointed that they didn't solve it. Kirk Cousins wasn't who he was supposed to be. He was hurt. Okay, that's a disappointment. But you have solved the problem. Now, are there going to be new variables in the equation? that's what you have to sit back for. But we're going to get out of here. Appreciate everybody joining us today. We will be back on Wednesday as Falcons training camp kicks off this week to get into any of the news that pops up, any of the questions you might have, et cetera, et cetera. If you want to keep the conversation going, Nick and I are going to be on youtube.com/milehighhuddle in about 20 minutes to talk basically same thing, but Denver Broncos, win totals, power rankings, et cetera, et cetera. So we're out of here. Thank you for joining us. Want to say thank you to Keith Brugman for the stars over on Facebook and Rusty for the super chat over on YouTube. On that note, thanks everybody for being here. Hope you'll have a great rest of your day. Enjoy the week, and we'll see you on Wednesday.
Peace.